Now it's time to move to the prequel trilogies, at long last. Moving into the second trilogy, which is a very different universe from the first one, I'm going to kind of start with the end of the first Star Wars trilogy, where they kind of went during those intervening years. So I call those the quiet years. So after the release of Return of the Jedi, the Star Wars universe, the film part, continued in a fashion. There were the live-action films, Caravan of Courage and Ewok Adventure, and Ewoks: The Battle for Endor in 1984 and 1985. I've never seen them. I've been advised not to. I'm sure they probably have some kitschy charm. I've got the trailers for you folks to watch, should you want to try to find them. It's one of those things they try to bury, kind of like the Christmas special, because they're kind of embarrassing. You also had Ewoks and Droids, which were two animated series, which also ran from 1985 to 86. But then things basically petered out. Even the action figures were really done by 1985. No movies meant, it's like, why are we still buying these toys? Okay, it's time to move on to G.I. Joe or something like that. ILM became one of the go-to special effects units, even without Star Wars films to work on, and they've been doing that for a while. Even while the other Star Wars movies were going on. Lucasfilm produced some hits, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Willow, and then also some flops, Labyrinth and Howard the Duck. And then LucasArts became a player in the adventure video game market, but oddly it couldn't release Star Wars titles until 1992 because Activision owned the rights to do all Star Wars movies. That's kind of embarrassing. So it was a very quiet time for Star Wars fans. The extended universe was still kind of trucking along, but, nobody really thought about Star Wars as much because nobody had any idea that new movies were going to be coming out. Allegedly, it was ILM's dinosaur test footage for Jurassic Park that convinced George Lucas it was time to do the next trilogy. So digital effects had really kind of started to come into their own. I'm not going to say they totally did, but it definitely worked in Jurassic Park. So an important digression here, because I know a lot of you folks are probably not super well versed in the way effects are done. We tend to see effects and we accept them. I mean, everything is done digitally these days, so that's what we're used to. But Star Wars had always relied on bleeding edge technology, and ILM invented or improved a lot of the technology that it needed over the course of the three films. And by the end of Return of the Jedi, they were still unable to create realistic digital 3D renderings of anything other than vector shapes. So the maps of the Death Star in both films, where it appeared, the first film and then the last film, though they have some digital effects, but they're really just vector effects. Okay. Instead, the effects were created by increasingly complex combinations of models, mats, and optical layering. So if you ever wondered why the effect shots in the first trilogy are often slightly grainy, soft, or have telltale blue fringing around characters and shapes, that's entirely due to the compositing, matte creation, and rephotography processes, which literally just beat the original narrative to shit while making the multiple intermediates necessary to build the shot. They would just rephotograph the same stuff over and over again, adding something new each time. And you get specks of dirt, all kinds of stuff. You lose your contrast. It's a really hard mechanical, chemical process to really do. So what I've done is I've given you folks access to a 4-part article series which discusses and explains the transition from optical to digital effects over the last half of the 20th century. So this is out there. Parts 2, 3, 4, and 5 are the ones that are most relevant to what's going on here. So you can kind of understand the way that the first trilogy was put together. And that's one of the reasons why I had you folks watch as close to the original versions as possible. So you're watching all optical effects. You're not watching any of that extra digital bullshit that Lucas added later to clean it up. Now, if you watch those, you'll see that they replaced a lot of the optical effects with digital versions or cleaned them up. But before that, that was not an option. Okay. Moving on to the second trilogy. In 1994, Lucas pulled out his old notes from the early 70s, sat down and started writing episode 1. And the rest is history. But there are two important points to be made here. Number one, by this time, George Lucas was surrounded only by people who would treat him with the reverence that he felt he deserved. So no more Gary Kurtz or Marcia Lucas or Lawrence Kasdan. He refused to do rewrites on a script with a 9-year-old protagonist, which he thought was a horrible idea. Just Rick McCallum, who was Lucas's new producer, and a bunch of yes men eager to turn all of Lucas's whims into reality. If Lucas wanted something, boom, Rick McCallum and his team would make it happen. Number two, with pre-production lagging behind by a couple of years, Lucas decided to release the special editions of the first 3 movies, first to drum up public interest. It was also a way to test out the new digital effects he wanted to do in the second trilogy to see whether they'd work or not. The special editions were successful in drumming up Star Wars fever in time for the promotional campaign of Episode 1. So the special editions started like in 1997, and so we knew that in a couple of years, they were going to be wrapping up Phantom Menace and be coming out. So it kind of helped get people ready for it, get, the Star Wars energy going again. But they're also an object lesson in what happens when you do something just because you can, not because you should. And the special editions bring up many strong emotions in fans, and almost none of them are good. I mean, we're all glad to see the movies again and have an excuse to watch them, but a lot of the new digital effects that they inserted, new scenes, extra robots, extra monsters, really weren't good. And a lot of us questioned, it's like, why tinker with that? But it's George Lucas, man, that's how he do. So at last, in 1999, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace arrived, and fans came to the conclusion that it was also not good. It is, simply put, a bad movie. It is. It tells a story, there are actors, spaceships fly through space, really cool spaceships in some cases. Aliens do funny stuff. There's a lightsaber battle, but it kind of functions like a family reunion. You're there because you're supposed to be. Some folks went to a lot of trouble to put it together. You're kind of glad to see the familiar faces, but you're not sure if you really want to be there because of the major cringe factor. Okay, cringy is probably the nicest adjective that could be used to describe Phantom Menace, and arguably the entire prequel trilogy, except I know a lot of people of your specific generation, and probably the one before, are like super digging Revenge of the Sith now, which I don't fully understand, but I'm going to watch it again and see if there's justification for that. But ultimately, for the prequel trilogy, disappointing is probably the most apt label. Okay, and chiefly because of these reasons here. One is, have you ever seen a 9-year-old that can carry a film who's not named Macaulay Culkin? If you can name one, let me know. We'll put that like in a discussion somewhere. Jar Jar. Dubious plots with racist depictions of cartoon Chinese villains. Okay, the Trade Federation guys are like really bad Chinese stereotypes. I don't think you can come to any other conclusion. They're supposed to have Transylvanian accents, but that's just not what I'm getting. That's not the vibe I'm getting here. And then, of course, you have a complete inability to direct actors. George Lucas was never that good at it. And having some young, eager-to-please actors who needed more guidance ended up producing what you end up seeing on the screen. And one thing I'll point out is at least 2 of the actors in this film have had their lives ruined by it. So one has attempted suicide. You know who that is, most likely, Jar Jar. The other is in a long-term psychiatric facility. This is literally the dark side of the Force at work here. So you go from being the most hated child actor in 1999, and then that shapes your childhood, and then it just so happens you have adult onset schizophrenia. Go figure. So, dark side of the prequels, right there. So the Phantom Menace. I don't know where my posters went. There should be posters here. Whatever. You'll see them on the page when you look at it. Directed by George Lucas. Written by George Lucas. You can tell. Budget was $115 million, because of inflation. All right. Box office was $431 million domestic, and it was $924 worldwide. The rest of the world liked The Phantom Menace a lot more than Americans did. which helps explain why if you put if you dub the Phantom Menace into another language, it's awesome. It's so much better. I'll try to put that version up if I can. If I can get it like dubbed in Spanish or French, it's a much better film than in English. So it's the first Star Wars film in 16 years. First film directed by George Lucas in 22 years. The first installment in what would ultimately become Darth Vader's origin story. Combines familiar characters like Obi-Wan and R2, 3PO, Jabba the Hutt, the future Emperor, no idea who that is, Yoda, and with new characters more or less essential to the development of the Star Wars universe, like Mace Windu, Padme Amidala, Qui-Gon Jinn, Jar Jar Binks, unfortunately, and, of course, Anakin Skywalker. So our synopsis: 2 Jedi are sent by the Chancellor to negotiate a trade blockade affecting a small planet when they are thrust into a nefarious plot to upset the balance of the Galactic Republic. Story also involves a princess, a 9-year-old slave, a civilization of amphibians battling an army of dog-shaped robots, and a really long pod race. It features an exciting and dynamic lightsaber battle and one of the most memorable villains ever to grace the screen for only about 6 minutes. A lot of people, their only positive memory of the Phantom Menace is Darth Maul, and he's only in the movie for 6 minutes. This was the last of the second trilogy to be shot on 35mm film, and the second 2 originated on video, which is practical when every single shot is an effects shot, so it makes quite a bit of sense. And we'll talk about that in more detail when we talk about Attack of the Clones.